Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by Jerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel. Time for this week's edition of the Recruiting Breakdown. And Jerry, anytime we've got the Recruiting Breakdown here on Texas Football, it's brought to you by Texas alum Mark Saunders.
Yeah, it's recruiting season, man. You need insurance, man. You get banged up in June and July. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders. He's the only insurance agent you'll need if you live in the Austin and Round Rock area, the entire state of Texas. He's your guy, Texas alum and Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders. Everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV. Give Mark Saunders a call today. His office number is 512-218-8571.
Gentlemen, no time to decompress from the recruiting weekend. We got 4 locked-in commitment dates to talk about from visitors from this past weekend, one that visited 2 weeks ago. Guys, we'll start with Dre Quinn, the 4-star edge out of the state of Georgia. Thursday is his commit date. Texas, in theory, gets the last weekend visit. Jerry, I'll start with you. Dre Quinn has given his unofficial visit and now his official visit to Texas really high marks. Handicap this Dre Quinn race and where Texas stands.
Yeah, so look, it's going to be an interesting decision because closer to home is Clemson, right, where he lives. That's going to be closer to home. And I think is Clemson trying to push the you can get on the field earlier guaranteed path? I think they might be. Does that mean are we saying he's going to Clemson? We're not saying that. I think he's had the best visits, and CJ talked to him Sunday. Well, I talked to him in the past. I think he's had his best visits at Texas. And is that going to be enough to overcome the close to home? And is the SEC going to be a factor as well? Because if you look at Dre Quinn's visits, there was 3 SEC and 1 ACC.
CJ, as Jerry said, you talked to Dre Quinn on Sunday. He told you that the Texas official visit was the best of the bunch for him so far. He had nothing but glowing things to say after his unofficial visit. Seems like twice he's been on campus in the last couple of months, and Texas has knocked it out of the park both times.
Going back to the spring, right, it was kind of where is Texas in this race? And then immediately following his spring unofficial, Texas was right there in the top 3. I talked to him Sunday, and he said, look, Texas, my official visit to Austin was the best that I've taken so far in my recruitment. Is that a guarantee he commits to Texas? No. But Zeno Umeozulu, Justice Terry, these guys did a great job of hosting him. And the Texas staff did a great job of kind of pitching to him where they would use him and how they would develop him in their system. That's something that he mentioned to me was a main takeaway beyond just the campus, the football program, the city, but development, scheme usage, and overall playability. Texas did a fine job. Now, to Jerry's point, does that mean that he's going to end up committing to Texas? We'll have to wait and see, but high remarks coming out of that Texas visit, no doubt.
When we talk about the out-of-state edge picture, we'll get and address it towards the current visit weekend, the upcoming visit weekend. This thing is about to go from clear as mud to it's going to clear up in a hurry, starting with the Dre Quinn commitment, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But, Jerry, Vondrell Cleveland's been an interesting name. He cancels his Miami visit. You said this has looked like it's going to be a Texas versus Florida battle, and with his commitment set to take place on Saturday, sure does seem like it's the Longhorns and the Gators for Vondrell Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm going to throw one more out there. They'll be on the list. It's North Carolina. He made that unofficial visit midweek. So I think and we've been saying this, if this thing was going out of state, which it looked like it was, the one-time Alabama commitment, by the way, it looked like it was going to be Texas or Florida. I am going to throw North Carolina in the mix, but I'll still be surprised, I guess, if he doesn't pick an SEC school. And I do think he had his best visit was Texas last weekend. And I know some people are saying, oh, that means he's going to Texas because that was the visit, and then he canceled the rest and says an announcement date. But really, I think he got out the 3 schools that were really – and he visited Georgia as well, by the way. And Georgia does want him. So he visited the schools that were really in it for him and got those out of the way. And I think this process gets tiring. And, yeah, he could have made the Miami visit, and he could have gone down to Coral Gables. But I think this process gets tiring. And if you've been to the 3-4 schools that are really high on your list and you're ready to make a decision, you're going to get it out of the way. I do think he had a tremendous visit to Texas last weekend.
CJ, to Jerry's point, you caught up with a lot of these guys at the airport on their way out of town, and not Vondrell Cleveland specifically. But do you get the feeling, to Jerry's point, that a lot of these guys are just at the point where they're just done and they're ready to get this thing over with?
Well, it's interesting because it's only really for a lot of these guys weekend 2 of their official visits. I know many started taking official visits May 30th. This is 3 and eventually going to be 4 weekends on the road, probably flying from, state to state across the country. So, yeah, I would imagine it gets pretty tiring at this point. You probably have been at each school that you're officially visiting once or twice before, in the sense of a Braden Rouse who visited Texas for his second time last weekend. He's going back to Tennessee this weekend, and that's probably going to be his visit number 6 to Knoxville. So there's familiarity. There's a lot of miles being racked up by these guys, and ultimately I think a lot of them are just ready for it to be in the past so they can focus on their senior seasons and move on. But Texas, look, they had some big fireworks at the first official visit weekend. Not as much out of that second one, though we're still expecting there to be a few. Now, how do they wrap things up with this June 20th official visit weekend? That's going to be really interesting to me because, hey, they're bringing in a lot of the current class for official visits as well. It's always helpful to have some more hands on deck when it comes to recruiting these big national prospects.
Gerry, a week from Friday, Malachi Lee is scheduled to make the call. You said this kind of reminds you of Brandon Baker's recruitment from the standpoint it could be Michigan against the SEC. Do you still feel that way? And in terms of those SEC schools, how do you like Texas' chances against Georgia and Alabama from Malachi Lee?
I'll be surprised if it's Alabama. And I've been surprised before, but he just made his second visit to Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're Alabama and Texas, you kind of got to feel queasy about that. I know he went to his official visit in April early to Georgia, but this is a family that CJ flew home to Hawaii and flew back to Athens for an unofficial. I think everybody's probably like, we got some work to do. That doesn't mean it's going to be Georgia, but I think if you're Georgia, you're probably saying, well, we are the one that got the second visit. And so that is telling. But I do think Michigan, they get the last visit this weekend, last official visit, but I do think they probably know they're up against it because anytime a guy's made 3 official visits to SEC schools and you're the Big Ten school, your odds are just lower. It is what it's like. Damari Simeon, the way Texas feels about Damari Simeon, they're in it, but the guy's visited Michigan and Penn State. He's going to Ohio State this week. I mean, that's a lot of flavor from one conference for a kid from New Jersey. So that's where it comes out. I think Malachi Lee really likes Texas. And I know Texas loves Malachi Lee as a prospect. But I think when the thing with Georgia is Malachi Lee became their guy when Jackson Cantwell committed to Miami over Georgia. I think that really took their effort with Malachi Lee to another level. So we'll see which way it goes. By the way, so we have Xavier Crowell, June 26th, Malachi Lee, June 27th, and Xavier Griffin, June 29th. So there are going to be some big decisions coming up here at the end of June before the July 4th fireworks.
And not so much July 4th fireworks, but July 8th fireworks. Jaylen Lot moves his commitment date, CJ, from July 4th to July 8th. Give me your take on the Jaylen Lot recruitment right now. This is one that a lot of Texas fans have been following this one for a long time, and we're coming down to the end here on Jaylen Lot.
Yeah, I was told he had a great visit. Obviously there's some familiarity there with some former Lovejoy teammates of his in the DFW area. He was hosted by Dalen McCutcheon as well on his trip. Texas, since they started recruiting him as a wide receiver, that's changed things for the Longhorns. Of course, they were always in this race, but now prioritizing the position that he wants to play at the next level, that's put Texas into that elite tier. I'm not going to say that Texas is a for sure a lock, right? Because anything can happen when a team like Oregon is involved or USC in this cycle. So we'll see what goes on with Texas, Oregon, and USC. Those are the 3 right now to watch. LSU, Ohio State more on the outside for now. But look, this final visit's going to be big, and I think Lott has a good understanding of where he wants to be, having spoken to him before. Look, this official visit for Texas, again, just being able to sit down with Chris Jackson and Steve Sarkisian and feel the pitch of where I'm wanted and where they plan to utilize me in this offense, I think it's going to go a long way, especially when you consider the quarterbacks going to be lined up for the Longhorns moving forward. Though this final visit, it's going to be a big one for Jaylen Lot.
Gerry, this run of commitment announcements, you mentioned Xavier Crowell and Xavier Griffin have theirs coming up before the end of the month. We just talked about Dre Quinn, Bodney Cleveland, Malachi Lee, Jaylen Lot in January. You look at all these position groups, Gerry, which one does Texas need to start seeing some dominoes fall. We've seen a couple, wide receivers kind of shaking out already with the Cone Brown commitment recently. But, take yourself inside that recruiting office, inside Moncrief. If you're Kyle Flood or Kenny Baker or whomever on the staff, which one of those guys needs to start seeing some dominoes fall?
I think it's going to be offensive line. And I say that because if you look at how many after quarterbacks, offensive linemen come off the board, the most of them second. And Texas started with around 10, 11 official visitors likely. Well, Roseborough went to A&M yesterday. Yep. Sam Utu went to Alabama. A couple of other guys have fallen off, made their commitments. So now Texas is there with 2 commitments, wanting to sign 5. And they're down to Turntine, who's coming in this weekend, Felix Ojo, Zayden Crimpin, and Grayson McHugh, the very talented tackle out of Philly area that's not talked about enough. It was a late May offer by Flood. But, I mean, the numbers have dwindled pretty quick here.
Yeah.
And to have the 5-man class you want to have, that means you got to hit on 3 of 4. And A&M's going to give it all they have on Turntine.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about John Turntine here in just a minute. But first, as we get to this visit weekend, the 3rd visit weekend in the month of June, guys, I want to start – I mentioned it earlier, but I want to start with that out-of-state edge group because you got Trenton Henderson coming in. He's kind of the headliner this weekend. But, Gerry, there's 3 out-of-state edge guys that are going to be on campus. You've got Dre Quinn making his commitment on Thursday. Things are starting to pick up a little bit in that edge group after it seemed like all the news we had in the edge room for a while was Jamarian Carlton's visit. It was kind of quiet before then, been quiet since, but business is about to pick up for Lealon Clark's group.
I mean, is this a triangle weekend? You have Florida, not a direct triangle weekend, I guess. You have Florida with Trenton Henderson, Jersey with Wafel, and LA with Richard Wesley. I mean, if that's not national recruiting, I don't know what is. Yeah. Coming off a weekend where you had Georgia guys and Florida guys, right? I mean, there's your national recruiting position along with Jamarian Carlton. And by the way, Bryce Perry Wright's kind of a hybrid with out of Georgia as well. So this is a national recruiting battle position. And CJ, when we talk about Trenton Henderson was at Florida last week, and I think that is the team that Texas is worried about most. Then you have Auburn, who's been a staple, and then you visited LSU and Michigan. So we'll see what happens with Trenton Henderson. They're working from behind. Can they come from behind in a short amount of time and beat Florida? We'll find out. Then Richard Wesley, obviously, he decommitted from a pool and jumped into the pool and then
he dried off.
Yes, he did. He dried off. Yes, and returned the towel to Dan Lanning. So but he visited Oregon June 6th. Texas is in it. They're here this weekend. His recruitment's going to the fall. He's visiting Ohio State officially for the Texas game. And then USC is going to get him on campus at some point. So that one's going to go a while. So we can almost put that one in a different category. But then CJ's Luke Wafel. Can Texas beat out Penn State where his brother plays? He also visited Ohio State and USC. But the fact that he's making the Texas visit, I think, is probably a pretty positive sign for the Horns. Him and his dad like Texas. His dad played at Duke. They like Texas. There's something about Texas that's really appealing to them. Else you'd have already gone ahead and committed to Penn State.
Look, he's visited Texas several times on his own dime before, dating all the way back to last July. He's talked about having memorabilia and jerseys and stuff along that nature from Texas in his house growing up. So there is some sort of attraction to the Longhorns that might be under the radar at the moment. The one thing for me, Gerry, is when you look at this edge room and the way that it kind of shakes out, you mentioned that triangle. Look, there's a lot of different pinpoints you could point to across the country. But this weekend is kind of where it all comes back down to it because it feels like it ultimately will decide what this room will look like or what directions they'll end up going in their class. There are a lot of big-time talented guys. You got a 5-star Richard Wesley coming in, 5-star Trenton Henderson, and Texas very much interested in Luke Wafel as well. It feels like to me what happens with this edge room will be determinant upon how this weekend goes with a number of its top prospects coming on the campus.
We'll get to some in-state guys visiting here in just a second. But, Gerry, before we get there, let everybody know one more time why they need to get in touch with Texas alum Mark Saunders for all of their insurance needs.
Do you have a home, a car, a boat, a motorcycle, RV, or even an ATV? If you do, Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders is your guy. He serves the Austin and Round Rock area and the entire state of Texas. You will be in great hands with Texas alum Mark Saunders. That's over 35 years of experience in this space. Call Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders' office today, 512-218-8571.
CJ, intriguing group of in-state visitors coming up this weekend. You've got Caden Finley is going to be in town, KJ Edwards, John Turntine, as Gerry mentioned a minute ago, Kosi Okpala, off-ball linebacker. In-state's been one of those positions that's been kind of quiet, and you'll get some visitors on campus this weekend. Give me one of these or a couple of in-state guys that you're really monitoring going into the weekend that you're going to be on alert for to hear any kind of movement over the weekend.
I look, offensive line is normally the spot for me, but I think you have to look at running back and say, okay, KJ Edwards, you're the guy right now for Texas in its recruiting class until or if an official visit for Derek Cooper is ever set. Look, you've got to look at KJ Edwards as if he's the one guy in this class. Of course, Texas very much in the running for Xavier Crowell, who, again, has an official or a commitment date coming up at the end of the month, June 26th. But right now, it's hard to pull Alabama kids out of the state of Alabama when Alabama and Auburn are very much into that race. So I look at it, KJ Edwards saying Texas needs a running back in this class, probably need two. Right now, he's the number one guy on my board for the Longhorns, and it feels like to me, Gerry, that Texas is the leader in this recruitment. And if things go well, look, it shouldn't be a surprise to see him end up choosing the Longhorns hat when it's all said and done.
Yeah, no doubt. CJ, I had a question for you. How deep is the water at the fountain?
At the fountain, about 2.5 feet.
So no Sark and Wesley like jumping into that? Okay.
Belly flops only. You got to pad yourself.
Okay. That's more the hook'em photos there, which is kind of the giveaway. All right, so yeah. But I think Turntine's fascinating for me because Texas has led for him a long time. And multiple family members in Austin, right, going to college, Houston, Tillotson, whatnot. And A&M has one offensive lineman committed in their class, and Ojo is not considering them. I think this is turning into there aren't as many true A&M Texas battles or Texas OU battles anymore, but on the offensive line in this cycle, they're kind of taking form. So John Turntine's interesting for me this weekend. The edge business we talked about. I'll tell you a sleeper one for me this weekend is Paris Melvin. So he is the guy that last week set up a June official visit. And he was on campus unofficially. Texas got him to cancel A&M. So he really likes Texas. And the other thing with that is he's being recruited as a defensive back. So if Paris Melvin came out of this weekend and set a commitment date or just committed to Texas, is that bad news for Devon Benjamin in Texas? That's kind of some of the things we have to watch as this plays out right now. But I'll tell you this. The big ones, the big ones for me outside of Turntine and the edges this weekend is Kendall Gerville and Valdon Sohn. Because if Texas gets Vodney Cleveland, they have Dylan Berryman, they have Corey Wells. They're really close to having a tremendous 4 or 5 man defensive line group. So Gerville's a guy that kind of like Turntine, but not the same. But Texas has been out in front for Gerville. When I was there in May, he said it on this YouTube channel, Texas was number one. And he's kind of maintained that coming out of each visit, the Florida visit and the Georgia visit. That's a big one. I think he's a really good fit at Texas. And I think that Florida pipeline, I think that's something Texas wants to have success in. I think that's a really big recruitment. And Valdon Sohn is kind of a wild card for me because I'm not sure anybody has a feel for where this is going. Obviously, he's from Sweden. He plays at the Blue Ridge School in Dike, Virginia. Same guy that brings guys to the States that are really good, talented football players, either whether that be from Europe or Africa. A guy named Brandon Collier we've had on the show. He helped get Hero Canoe to the States. Mm-hmm. So there's a connection there with Texas, but it's a true wild card recruitment. And those are two of the top defensive tackles in the country. And so I'm very interested to see where it kind of falls this week. And by the way, my last thing on this weekend that I have is Diabel may step on campus as the Elite 11 champion this year. We'll see how that plays out the next 2 days.
Gerry, I'm glad you brought that up because, CJ, I was going to give you the last word. Wide receivers, one position we haven't talked about.
Me too.
But with Chris Stewart in the boat, Cohen Brown in the boat, if you're Chris Jackson, you can go all in now on Caden Finley and Jaylen Lot to finish off this class. You got Caden Finley on campus this weekend. CJ, give me your take on where the wide receiver position is right now.
Yeah, I think you just hit it. You laid it out, right? You know, you have 2 in the boat. You probably want to take 2 more. You have kind of that safety net of a Jermaine Bishop in the backside of your class already if you don't land a Jaylen Lot or a Caden Finley. But look, Notre Dame, Texas for Caden Finley, Texas, Oregon, maybe a little USC for Jaylen Lot. Both in-state guys, both guys with ties to the university. It should feel like easy pickings, though we know in this era of recruiting, it certainly is not. But Texas gets that chance for Caden Finley to get one last visit before a decision date coming up later in the summer. But I like where Texas sits for Caden Finley going into the weekend. We'll see if they're able to close the door or even kind of batten up the hatches even more on that recruitment. And the other position I think we need to mention is, look, you talk about having shots on net on the defensive line this year. You talk about that net maybe closing a little bit on the offensive line. Texas only bringing in 3 guys at tight end this year.
Yeah, true.
With Mark Bowman committing to USC and canceling the Texas official, look, you brought in Hezzy Ken a weekend ago, and now it's up to Caden Prothro and Kealby Brown coming in this weekend, both from the out-of-state ranks as well. Texas needs to land at least one this cycle. Is it going to be from this weekend? Will it be Hezzy Kent? That's going to be a really interesting storyline to follow as this weekend continues.
And there, by the way, there aren't many weekends that Arch Manning isn't the most popular guy on campus, but Rhonda Rousey is the stepmom of Kealby Brown.
Yeah.
And Travis Brown, the former UFC fighter, is the father of Kealby Brown. So it may be Arch Manning looking to get in photos this weekend instead of the other way around.
Gerry, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I'll go ahead and give you the final word here. If you're Sark and you've got to push for a commitment from any of these visitors on campus where you're like, yeah, you just got to get this position secured, you got to feel better about it, who's the one guy you're pushing for this weekend? Because I think CJ brought up a really good point about tight end where you don't have any and your options are dwindling.
I think it's crazy as this sounds, it may be KJ Edwards. Because Derek Cooper did not set up an OV. Xavier Crowell's at Alabama, and Alabama's the team to beat. Doesn't mean Texas can't win it, but everybody knows Alabama's the team to beat. If KJ Edwards, you lost KJ Edwards A&M, that would probably sting quite a bit.
Yeah,
because you could have 0 running backs recruited or 0 running backs committed in the 26 class heading into the season. So they actually KJ Edwards, by circumstance and with A&M making the big push they did, may actually take center stage a little this weekend.
Is that the recruitment, guys, as we wrap it up, where running back specifically, where you're dealing with first world problems, like on the offensive line, where you may have lost out on Samuel Roseborough, really good prospect. Yeah. You can still end up with a heck of a class. Is running back, Jared, running back, tight end, those are the positions we're talking about where if you start missing on some guys, suddenly the drop off from your targets to where you've got to go next, there's a gap there. Yeah,
I agree. At tight end, I mean, they signed 2 guys last year, but the crazy thing about running back now is they've been signing 2 running back classes. It'd be hard to go from 2 to 0.
Yeah,
that's the one thing about it is that would grab a lot of people's attention. Our chats would be on fire if that happened, by the way, because tight ends, like, look, if Mark Bowman had committed to Texas, the chat would have been on fire. But you still have Nick Townsend and Amari Winston. But at running back, if Xavier Crowell goes to Bama and KJ Edwards goes to A&M, and then you have 0 running backs in the class, it's hard to go from 2 to 0.
Yeah. In a way, running back feels like the defensive line of last year, where it just, you have the position change or coaching change early on in the winter. You're still kind of rebounding off of already established relationships with other prospects, other schools. But you got to take care of your backyard. And Texas was fortunate enough last year to go out and win some big out-of-state groups, recruitments. But for running back this year, KJ Edwards is the top uncommitted guy in the state. He's considering you in another in-state school. This is one that you should be winning 9 times out of 10 if you're the Longhorns.
Gerry, CJ said it on a live stream, the Wednesday night live stream last week. The Texas is in the hunt for the right guys. They're competing for the right guys. And I'll say this in closing. No disrespect to the in-state power conference programs, but I'm having a lot of fun tracking Sark and this staff battling Clemson and Notre Dame and Alabama and Florida and Georgia and Southern Cal for recruits, rather than Mac Brown, Charlie Strong, and Tom Herman battling U of H and Baylor and TCU and Tech for recruits. It's a nice change of scenery.
It's absolutely where you want to be. I mean, if you're not battling Florida and Georgia and Florida and Alabama, it's not the same with Alabama, but Alabama for an LSU for the top guys in the SEC, then you may not be recruiting the right guys. I mean, that means you're recruiting and Clemson, because those Georgia kids they go to Clemson as they should. It's 2.5, 3 hours away from home if you're in Atlanta, and they won 2 national titles and were in the playoffs again last year. Those are the programs you need to be battling right now. As you recruit more in the Southeast region, those are the schools that you have to be battling. And the more battles they're in there, the better I feel about the continued top 5 class success of Texas. I'll say this too, to your point, recruiting the right guys. Kendall Gerville, I think, is a really good fit at Texas. And I'm not saying Texas is going to get all these guys. Cohen Brown, that obviously came through on video. Braden Rouse, I think Tennessee leads, but I think he's a great – CJ, you talked to him. He's a fit type of guy. You know it the more you recover a coach and the type of players they're recruiting. I really think Dre Quinn, I think, is the same way. I think they're in on a lot of really good fits. And obviously, yes, they should be. People say, why wouldn't you be? Well, you still have to be able to get in on all those guys and get those guys to campus from out of state. And I think they're on the right guys. And I'm kind of fascinated, along with everybody else, to see how this class ends up. Because I'll tell you right now, the Texas staff doesn't know how it's going to end up, just like the Georgia staff doesn't know how theirs is going to end up in Clemson and Florida. They may feel good about some guys and they don't get them. They may get a couple of guys they didn't feel good about before they made this last weekend visit. But they're on the right guys. And the other thing I would say is, and after July, about 15th or 20th, when the majority of these kids commit, Justice Terry wasn't in the class, Grayson Littleton wasn't in the class, Zealous Hicks hadn't reclassed yet. There are a lot of moving parts in recruiting that goes on through senior seasons.
All right, and we'll be tracking all of it for you here on the channel and over at ontexasfootball.com. Gerry, CJ, thank you guys for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes. Thank you to the entire On Texas Football staff. Don't forget to subscribe to the On Texas Football YouTube channel if you haven't already. Like this video and get over to ontexasfootball.com, where right now, sign up using the promo code OTFOG. That'll get you 1 year of access at ontexasfootball.com for $39.95. Again, the promo code is OTFOG. That'll get you 1 year at ontexasfootball.com for $39.95. For CJ, for Gerry, for producer Matthew, for everybody at On Texas Football, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And until next time, hook 'em.